What is up, producers? Welcome back to the channel. If you just opened up Ableton 12 and you don't know what you're looking at, this video is for you. In this video, in under an hour, I'm going to give you guys all the tools and information you're going to need to know to be a OG in Ableton Live 12. Before we hop in, I want to let you guys know that I just dropped the dopest EDM course. It took me a year to make. I've been producing for 10 years. I have 3 degrees, and I basically got all that knowledge and narrowed it down to 30 days, everything you're ever going to need to know to make bangers. And it's super, super affordable, half off for my subscribers. So if that's something you're interested in, check it out. The link's in the description. Let's get into the video. So everything we're going to be looking at is going to be based off 4 different sections. The browser section, the lower section, the timeline, and the head of the track. The first section we're going to talk about is going to be the timeline section of the track. So this is basically just a left to right chronological view of your track. For example, if we grab a drum loop, it's just playing left to right. So pretty straightforward. So if you open up the default section, the chances are that you have 2 audio tracks and 2 MIDI tracks. And you'll know that because over here it'll say audio or it'll say MIDI. And as we just discussed, these tracks serve vastly different purposes, so that's kind of important to differentiate. So in our timeline section, we have all of our tracks, top to bottom. So if we create a new MIDI track, they're all running concurrent with each other, top to bottom, and it just shows us what's playing. So we'll just keep going to the left, and then again, it'll only play what's in these rows. So if we come over here and we have our drum loop over a synth, if we don't, it'll just play the synth. So that part's pretty straightforward. If you've worked with any sort of audio editing, video editing software, it's your stereotypical timeline. So we're going to take a look at the browser section, and this whole section over here is, for lack of a better term, where all of your stuff is going to come from. So this is all of your plugins, all of your sounds, all of your instruments, all of your collections, your user library, everything can be found over here. So the browser section consists of a couple different sections within it. In Ableton 12, we now have this filter section. So we can collapse or expand this, and basically what this is all of your different sounds. With this tool, you can actually tag any of your sounds. So it'll auto tag some of them. So we can come in here and search for like certain formats. So Ableton devices, external devices, instruments, audio effects. Some we'll have to come in here and manually tag ourselves. The cool part about the tags editor is you can actually delegate these and set these however you want and however is best for your workflow. For example, I have some samples separated by who created the samples. So I can come in here and search for, maybe I want to use a Liney sample, which is an artist. All these results are going to show me only what's consecutive with the tags I'm selecting. Then I also have everything separated as the kind of unit that I'm working with. Say I'm working with transient shaping or something like that, or say I want an 808 sample. I kind of went in here and meticulously tagged all my samples, which by no means is necessary. It's just something I did that kind of helps with my workflow a little bit, by the kind of plugin it is. Totally up to you however you want to do these. Or you can just kind of leave them as it is and not use them. If we want to edit these, we can come up here and click on edit, and then we can come in here and we can create new tags. So we can add a tag, we can delete a tag, and it's super flexible. So this is, again, a new feature in 12, super powerful, super good for kind of keeping organized. Then down here, we have our search results. So anywhere we're at in Ableton, this is a huge, huge tip, is we press Command F, and it's going to take us up to the search bar here. So we could be clicked anywhere in Ableton on any device, and if we click Command F, it's going to take us to our browser, take us to our search bar. If we have all selected over here, it's going to search every single file we have for whatever we're looking for. So let's say we want an EQ. Command F, it's under all, so it's going to search everything, and now it's going to show us all of our results having to do with EQ. So again, the top one's EQ8, then a couple different other EQs I have. Utilizing the browser searcher in this way is super powerful, and it's something I see a lot of people sleep on when they come up here and they click and do whatever. Command F. And then you just can type whatever you want. Command F, kick. And then from here, we can just navigate down with the arrows, find a kick we want, and there it is. So all of our search results here can be categorized in a number of different ways. The way I like to do them is by rank. So this is going to show them to me based on how much I use them. Another update that's new in Ableton 12 is it's always going to show you your plugins first. So all the top search results are always going to be plugins. So these are plugins I have that have kick in the name of them, which is helpful because oftentimes if you're searching for a plugin, you'll have a lot of different samples with the name of the plugin in it. And now we can literally just come in here and they're going to be right at the top. Then because since I have everything else separated by rank, it's going to show me the samples based on the ones I use most to least. We can come over here and rank them from least used to most, which is beneficial if there's a sample you haven't really used that much. Or we can categorize them by size, by the date they were modified, by the type of sample it is, or by the place. So again, pretty flexible for how you want your workflow to go. I find that ranks is pretty good. And then these bars over here will show you the rank of how often you use them. So another cool feature, which is new to Ableton 12, is you can save a search result. For example, one of my favorite producers is John Casey, and all his samples start with JC. And a lot of the times I'll use a JC kick or a JC snare. So if I'm constantly searching JC snare to find a John Casey snare, I can now click this little plus button up here, this little icon, and it's going to save the search result. So now instead of coming up here and searching for that every time, I can click here and that search result's automatically going to come up. Pretty cool little shortcut. I haven't utilized it that much yet, but it's cool that it's there. So, and we talked about the file forms. So anytime we see something over here like a .amxd, we know that that's an Ableton Max for Live device. Same thing with these instruments, audio effects, ADV. We kind of went through all these already. So now we're going to talk about some of these settings over here. The first one we have on the top is collection. Basically, collections is pretty similar to the tag editor we just looked at. The difference is we can quickly tag stuff just by pressing a number 1 through 5. So these are in numeral order. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if I want to save something as one of in my sample selection, I just press 1 and it's going to automatically go to the sample selection. So this is a quick and easy way to kind of save your most used stuff. You can set this up however you want. You can rename these. So if you want like orange or 2 to be just your snares, you can do it that way. I have it so I have my top used favorite samples of all time. And then I have plugins that are for creative purposes, different effects I use, plugins I'm reminding myself to check out. So ones maybe I bought that I haven't really dived deep into, or ones to circle back into, my favorite drums, and then just some other random stuff. So again, however you want to set these up. Then we have the library. So the important part to remember about the library is these are all Ableton stock devices and sounds. Unless we're selected all, which again is everything. So this is everything in your samples, your plugins, Ableton samples. This is literally everything. If we come down to sounds, now this is going to be only Ableton sounds. So these are only ADV, so Ableton devices and Ableton groups. So if we click on any of these, now we have sounds, and sounds can be described as either an Ableton device, so a synthesizer, or an ADG, which again is a synthesizer, but it has controls and macros on it and effects. So coming into drums, these are going to be all your drum pad presets. So if I double click on any of these, we now have a drum pad. So basically what that means is these are all samples on drum pads, and we can play them with MIDI. So I'm pressing my MIDI controller right now. And basically we can play the drums this way. I always do my drums in audio, but these are here if you want them. And again, you can make these custom, so you can drag and drop your own drum samples on these. These are the ones that come with Ableton Suite. So a number of different drum sets. I'm not a big fan of any of the Ableton stock drum sets. They've came out with a couple decent ones since the update. I always use my own drums. I always use audio, but this is totally up to you. And then we have the controls here. So on the drum bus, we can affect the transients. These change depending on whatever drum rack we're using. So these are all drum rack presets is what they're called. Then coming down to instruments. So these are all of our digital instruments that come stock with Ableton. There's a number of different ones. Wavetable is a pretty popular one. So this is a wavetable synthesizer. We will definitely go into a deep dive of synthesis in this course. But this is a digital sound generator made by Ableton. And you have all these controls, all these macros to adjust it however we want. Again, in the synthesis module of this course, we'll get a deeper understanding of what all these controls do. So if it looks a little overwhelming, don't be worried. We'll touch on all that. And again, they do have presets for all of these that are already made. That's all the sounds up here, all the .ADVs. So these are all presets. So all these knobs and everything are preset to make a certain sound, basically. We can find the ADVs in here and the ADGs. So if we expand this down, now it's showing us all the presets for the wavetable and the presets, again, with the effects, which is an ADG. This is what's known as an Ableton group. And a group is a number of different plugins grouped into one little unit here. And over here, down here on these controls, if we click this option, it's going to toggle everything open. We have all these what are known as macros. And these are knobs that are mapped to different things within this group. For instance, this filter cutoff, we'll see is mapped down over here to the filter. And then not only do we have this wavetable, but if we come down here, we can see that there's a delay grouped into this big group and a reverb. And we can map any parameters on any of these devices we want to these macros here that are within this group. And anytime there's a pre-made macros, this is pretty much telling you these are the settings that are good to adjust within here. So instruments, we have all of our different instruments. We have our different presets for those instruments, and we have the different groups. So the instrument with the effects with the controls. And wavetable, there's a number of different ones. Wavetable is like a traditional synthesizer. Tension is a physical modeling synth, so it makes it sound like different types of stringed instruments. Simpler and samplers, so we'll go into those kind of in depth later, but that's turning, like we talked about, turning an audio clip into a playable instrument. And then we have all different kinds. This one's new, Meld, but these are all just different Ableton stock instruments. They make different sounds. They're for different purposes, and they have different presets. Next, we're going to go into audio effects. So audio effects can not only be used on audio tracks, they can also be used on MIDI tracks. And the reason for that is because these are basically effects that are affecting any sort of audio signal. So let's say, for example, we want to use a reverb on our drum loop here. We would come and find our reverb, or again, we can Command F search reverb. And now we have a reverb on our drum loop here. So these are all our different ways to affect audio. Again, we'll go over each and every one of these in depth a little later. Then we have MIDI effects. So these are all the different ways we can affect MIDI. So say we have some MIDI here, we can now use these to affect the pitch of the MIDI. We can set different scales for the MIDI. We can make different chord stacks out of the MIDI. Tons of different options here, just to affect the MIDI. Then we have modulators, which are different ways of affecting things. So LFOs, shapers, we can basically map these to control parameters. Again, we'll get into those kind of later in depth. Max for Live, we talked about these. These are all your Max for Live devices. Plugins, these are all of your third-party plugins. So these are not Ableton's. Anything under plugins is third-party. And again, the difference is Ableton instruments and devices are called devices. That's the technical term, whereas plugins are referred to as plugins or VSTs. So these are all my third-party ones. There's a snare synthesizer. Then we have clips. We covered these. So this, again, is the whole shebang. This is the synthesizer, the effects, and the MIDI mapping or the MIDI controls for everything. I really wouldn't lean into these too much. I wouldn't really use any of these, to be honest. Then we have samples. So these are primarily Ableton samples. And again, I personally don't really find myself using a lot of Ableton samples. They're here if you want them. It comes with a pretty good sized library of different samples. Then we have grooves, and we touched on these briefly when we were kind of going through the different features. And basically, these are different articulations and rhythms we can apply to different clips, audio or MIDI. So these are different shuffles and kind of articulations. And if we drag and drop this onto a clip, this section opens up, and this is known as the groove pool. And these are all the grooves you're using within a session. It's making them available here under Groove Pool. We can add these to our Groove Pool, and then if we want to maybe implement the groove onto this audio track, we can come down here on the groove and select hip hop or whichever one we're using. It's going to show all the ones that are in our Groove Pool. And now we're implementing the groove, the imperfections, the velocity, all that, which again, we'll cover later onto this audio track, or we can use them on MIDI. Then we have tunings, and these are new to Ableton 12. These are just different ways of tuning music. I've never touched these. I don't think I ever will touch these. By default, Ableton uses 12 TET tuning, it's called, or 12 TET. Tunings kind of go back to different roots and different cultures and whatnot. There are some unique ones on here. Again, I don't see myself touching any of these. I don't see any of the producers or artists I know really playing with these. They're fun to experiment. You can dig a little deeper into different types of tunings and kind of what they do and where they're from if you'd like. But yeah, it's just an option here. And the cool part about these is you can actually come down here and uncheck any of these that you don't plan on using. So I'm never going to use tunings. So I'm just going to uncheck this so I don't have to look at it. Then we have templates. So these are all your particular templates. And these are super cool because sometimes you want to save a template for a certain way you produce. For example, sometimes I edit podcasts or do audio editing. And I have templates saved, so I have all my stuff available. I have everything set up the way I want it. So if I'm going to edit a podcast or do some audio editing, I can just go to that template and I can save myself a bunch of time from going and finding a bunch of plugins and setting everything up. So the first section we have here are packs, which we went over, ADP or Ableton device pack. And these are all from the Ableton website. And these are tools you can download. So like here's one Granulator 3 that's new in Ableton 12. And that just comes as a pack and it's a granular synthesizer. So these are all packs you can download off the Ableton website or buy. Next, we have the user library. So this is a really practical place to save stuff that you like. Maybe you make a sample you really like or a synth patch you really like. This is a good place to put those so you know it's your stuff, it's your presets, it's your whatever. This is going to be all the files from the current project, which we don't have any as of now. And then we can add any files we want into places. That's cool. So we can add a folder and we can come in here and add any folder from our desktop. And now it'll be accessible from here and Ableton will be able to read it. For example, this here is my personal sample folder. So all the third-party samples I get, I save them in one samples folder and now they're all readily available right here in Ableton. So if I want to come find some samples that I've made or I've downloaded that have nothing to do with Ableton, I can come in here and that way I know it's a third-party sample that's in my personal sample folder. And again, you can add as many folders as you want here. So that's a pretty comprehensive overview of the browser section, all of your quote-unquote stuff. Next, we're going to talk about the lower section. So you might have seen a lot of stuff going on here while we were playing around and showing you guys different stuff from the browser section. And this section is called the lower menu, and this is going to change depending on what we have selected. So this is going to correspond with any track we have selected. So for example, if we have this audio track selected or we click the head of the track or the track title bar, this is called the track title bar. I call it the head of the track, either or. Any one of these we have selected, it's going to show us, if we click this part, this square right here, it's going to show us the processing for those particular tracks. So let's say on our drum loop, we have a reverb. And then let's say on this MIDI clip, we have a delay. Notice if I click the head or the title bar of this track, it's going to show the reverb. And if I come down here and click on this MIDI track, it's going to show me the delay. That's because this reverb only applies to this audio track, and this delay only applies to this MIDI track. So whatever track we have selected, it's going to show us all of our audio effects on that track. Now, if we select the audio clip, so instead of clicking up here on the head of the track, if we click the actual audio clip right here, now it's going to show us our audio editor. So this just changed from the audio effects to the audio editor. And this gives us all of our different options for affecting this audio clip. So we can come in here and we can warp this audio clip so we can move it around. There's a million different ways we can warp it. We can speed it up. We can slow it down. We can reverse it. We can warp it in different ways. So maybe we want to change the BPM. Maybe we want to make it twice as slow, twice as fast. Maybe we want to adjust the gain, so the volume level of it. All those options are right here. Then we have our warp modes, and this is really its own topic. This determines the way we're going to stretch this clip when we warp it. So for example, one type of warping is beats mode, and this warps it based on the transient or like the peak of the sound. So notice what happens when we warp it based on beats mode. So this is an example where it's kind of made for beats and it'll base the warping off the transients or the peaks in the volume level.
One time like.
Then we have warp modes like complex, which is an all-around good warp mode. This is good for vocals, it's good for instruments. It's good for like pitching stuff around. So this is like a pitch down vocal.
One time like this.
Maybe you want to pitch it up an octave or crank the pitch up.
One time like
this.
So complex mode is really good for vocals and general sounds like that. Every stretch we do on this audio clip corresponds with this warp mode. So that's why we want to make sure it's the correct warp mode. So complex is good, just all around good. That's why we preset it in the previous module to complex. Complex Pro is the best for vocals particularly.
One time like this, make it pop like this, make it knock like this.
So you can kind of use these two controls to really match it up and get the sound. I would say 90% of the time I use complex or beats mode. Then we also have repitch is a good one. So this adjusts the pitch and the time of the clip.
One time like this.
So it's like a turntable where the slower the BPM or the faster the BPM gets, the pitch corresponds with that.
One time like this. One time.
This make
And then we have ones like textures, which are good for kind of risers and stuff like that.
one time like
I don't really find myself using it that much. And then we have tones, which
one time I'm like
just goes off tones, and I don't use this one that much. So again, all different types to warp your sample. Something super important to note is if this warp button is off, it's not going to stretch the sample.
one time like this, make it pop like
So one key factor here with warping is if we stretch the BPM and warp is off, what's happening here is we're increasing the speed of the track, and it's not stretching the sample with the BPM of the track. The speed of the sample is going to stay the same. Since we're speeding up the speed of the track, it's going to make it look kind of funny. It's going to make sound funny. So you usually want warping on when you're doing stuff like this.
one time like this, make it pop like this, make it knock like
Then over here we have envelopes. So we can actually automate and adjust different warp settings here by just clicking in and creating shapes. So if we want to do like, maybe we want to automate the transposition, so we want to do like a pitch bend or something like that. We can come over here and do that here.
one time like this, this, make it knock like this, make it
So we can automate in real time any of these different warp settings in the envelopes tab. Circling back to what we were talking about, the lower menu is when we click on an audio clip, it brings up all these options. Now when we click on a MIDI clip, so again, not the head of the track, but the actual clip, it's going to bring up our piano roll and our MIDI editor. So this is what's known as our piano roll here. And basically, the way to think about this is all of our MIDI triggers, and this is basically just a piano roll. So if we want to insert a blank MIDI clip, so if we want to start working on MIDI and penciling in stuff on the piano roll, Shift Command M. Now we've created a MIDI clip that we didn't have before. Now we have the piano roll. So this is all of our control over MIDI here. So if we're not working with a MIDI keyboard, we can come in here and pencil in the MIDI triggers. Or again, if we have a MIDI controller, we can play these in. Or if we don't have a MIDI controller and we want to play them in, what we do is we press M. And notice when we press M on our regular keyboard, this toggle pops up, this keyboard icon. Now, once we press M, our regular computer keyboard, we can use it as a MIDI keyboard. So it's the keys are A, W, S, E, D, R, F, T, G, Y, H. And it's actually laid out like a typical piano, and it's super cool because now we can use just our regular computer keyboard to play stuff. That's M to activate. That's important because if you're ever clicking around and it's not working, check up here. You might have accidentally pressed M and now it engaged the MIDI. So it's playing MIDI instead of using quick cues and whatnot. So now it's a MIDI editor. And one more thing to just drive this home again, it's because we have a device on this track. If there was no device on this track, the MIDI is not going to generate any sound. So just like the audio editor, we have a multitude of different options here for adjusting this MIDI, especially in Ableton 12. They really went all the way with MIDI settings. There's tons of them in here. We can stretch these clips out. We can fit these to scale, which is super powerful. So if we're working on a specific scale, we can click this and all these notes are going to automatically map to the scale. So if you don't know music theory and you're trying to write something that makes sense, this button's phenomenal. Lock to scale. Legatos want to use a lot. So legato stretches all the notes to the next note. So if we press this, it's going to stretch them all until there's the next note playing. We can reverse these notes. Humanize, so that adds a little shuffle and incorrections in them. And then all these are just super comprehensive MIDI effects. Arpeggiate, we can arpeggiate them. So this arpeggiate basically means play them in rhythm. So play them like one at a time in rhythm. And then we have ones like strum, which is kind of like we can add like a guitar strumming, so kind of offset them. This will adjust the rhythm so we can create random rhythms. These are super in-depth, super comprehensive. I don't want to overwhelm you guys at this stage as far as the MIDI settings go, but yeah, this is all of your MIDI settings to edit your MIDI controls or your keyboard. So again, we can pencil these in, we can play these in. We can click these, or if we press B, this is now a pencil, so now we can draw stuff in instead of individually clicking stuff in. So B to toggle that. We can Command A to select all these MIDI clips, backspace to delete them. So all of your MIDI effects, and again, envelopes are here just like audio effects, so we can do pitch bends. We can affect the MIDI and automate that in this section. So again, audio clip, click on an audio clip, it'll bring up the piano roll and the MIDI editor. Click on an audio clip, brings up the audio editor. Click on the head of the track or the title, brings up all the audio effects. So hopefully that's understandable. Before we touch on the head of the track, let's talk about the transposition controls, which are up here. So we have a number of different options. Starting from left to right, this button right here will toggle open and close your browser. So this is a big deal because if you're working on a little computer, you really need all the space you can get to see everything. So we can click this to collapse stuff, or there's some quick keys we can use. So Option Command on Mac, and for PC it would be Windows Command. So Option Command 3 is going to expand your audio editor. Option Command 4 is going to expand the audio effects. 5 is going to be your browser. 6 is going to be your groove pool. 7 is going to be your live lessons and all this stuff that comes default with live. And so those are some quick keys for kind of moving around and making sure everything's closed and you're able to see everything you need to see, basically. And that's a super big deal because sometimes I'll see producers do stuff like this where they have live 12 lessons open, the audio effect editor's open, the browser's open, and they're trying to find and do something over here. And it's just super hard and strenuous to navigate. So it's good practice to kind of keep this open and focus on what you're looking at and kind of keep everything organized and kind of how it's practical to see everything. So there's that button up there. Then we have tap to tempo. So if there's like a certain beats per minute or BPM that you have in mind, you can actually tap it into place. And based on the spaces between the tapping, it's going to give you a BPM that you're looking for, which is pretty cool. Then this is the master BPM of the track, so how fast we want the track to go. Our measures, so this is a theory thing. This is how many beats per measures. 99% of the time it's going to be in 4/4. I wouldn't really worry about this too much. Then we have our metronome. So the little ticking we hear keeps us on beat, and this is what turns us on or off. Then we have some settings here, so we can set the count in for when we're recording, the sound, the rhythm, all that. I would just pretty much leave these as is. Then this features new in 12, and this is scale awareness. So basically what this does is we can lock our entire project to a certain scale. So as we saw down here in the MIDI editor, all these purple keys are showing us what notes are in key based on how we set this up here. So let's say we're going to write a track in D minor. Notice all these change, and this is going to tell us all the notes we have to play to stay in key in D minor, which is super phenomenal tool. We can actually come over here and hit scale, and what that's going to do is it's only going to show us the notes that are in scale. Super cool feature. So basically we can come in here and anything we play or anything we select is going to be in key now. So that's pretty neat. We can also just highlight the scale. So it's only going to show us all the notes and highlight the ones that are in scale. And then over here, we have the transposition controls. So we have play, stop, and record. Spacebar plays. So there's not really ever a need to come over here and click on this. It's just one extra step. So play will play from wherever the cursor is selected at. So this little green mark right here, anywhere we set this, it's going to start playing from there every time we hit space. And then record, it's good to map this to a quick key. So I'll show you how to do that in just a second here. So as far as mapping goes, if we hit Command K, we can now map these to keys on our keyboard. So what I like to do is I like to map this to equals because that's not set to anything in Ableton. And now instead of coming up here, I just press equals and it's going to automatically hit record. So again, Command K to key map, and anything we see, pretty much any setting at all, we can key map something to. And we want to make sure it's not a key that we're already using in Ableton, and we can set little quick keys for stuff like that. So again, equals is record. And then Command M is MIDI map. So if we have a MIDI controller, we can do the same thing where we can map these controls to our MIDI keyboard. So these two settings over here, we have this plus and then this chain. What this does is this is MIDI overdub. So like, let's say we're playing like some keys in. If we come over here and we start recording again, it's going to overwrite that MIDI. Now, if we press this, it's going to allow us to overdub or record over this MIDI. So that's a cool feature. And this is going to allow us to record automation. So if we have both of these selected, what's going to happen is we can now record over the MIDI and we can now record automations in without it overriding the MIDI. So I'm adjusting this down here, and when we play it back, now that MIDI is printed in here, so this knob is going to play automatically every time we play this clip. And to open your automation lane, so if you want to see the automation, press A. A is to show the automation. So if we want to now map tone, maybe we want to pencil it in, so we want to pencil automation in. Anything we've selected, so any knob or control we selected, it's going to show us this dotted line up here. And that's going to allow us to come in here and set our automation and pencil stuff in. Press A, then we don't see it. So those are some settings for some automation stuff. This button has to do with session mode, which we'll talk about in a minute here. This is showing us the bar or the measure we're on. And this button is loop. So say we're like working in this section right here and we just kind of want to loop something to hear it over and over again. We can either come up here and press this. So we'll highlight the section we want to loop and we can press this. Or we can press Command L. It's going to press this button essentially for us. This is a super useful tool when we're working in one section. I'm pretty much always looped on one section. Then over here, just like we were talking about with the MIDI editor, this is your pencil. So to toggle this from click and point to pencil is B. And so again, with just the clicker, it's going to just pencil in lines. So wherever we click, it's going to create a point of origin. With the pencil, now we can kind of freely draw in stuff. That brings me to another point. As far as the timeline goes, see these like gray sections we have here? Command 1 and Command 2 will increase or decrease the grid value. So these are showing what everything's going to lock to. So the automation, our cursor, everything's going to lock to wherever these lines are. Now, if we press Command 1, it's going to make these super small, like smaller. So now we can have a more finite control of where we're clicking in. Command 2 is going to make them bigger. So now it's going to give us less precision when selecting what area we're going in. Command 3 will put this on triplet grid, which basically means instead of 4s, it's on every third, which is kind of a unique thing. Command 4 will turn it off and show it in a dotted section. This is one of those tools that will really save you. Command scroll is going to make everything bigger or smaller. Option scroll is going to make everything taller or more narrow. So these, just holding Command, holding Option, and scrolling around with your mouse or your trackpad, this is one of those things that's really going to save you time and make you a better producer, knowing Command 1, Command 2, increase or decreasing grid value. Command scroll, Option scroll. Really helps you get around to wherever you're looking way, way faster without like straining your eyes and like looking for stuff and zooming in and coming up here and using this bar. Command scroll, Option scroll, Command 1, Command 2. Definitely like my most used controls out of all of them. We can also select a clip and press Z, and it's going to zoom into that clip. So kind of just some additional tools for navigating in your timeline. Then coming to the final section, and this is going to be the track title bar or the head of the track, either or. So this is giving us our routing options. We select the input for the track. So if we're going to record a microphone or a guitar, this is where we would do that. So let's say on our preferences, like we talked about earlier, we have input device. So let's say we have a microphone. So like here, I'm working with my microphone that's connected to my universal audio, which is audio interface. And now, as we can see, we have this reading here. So we have a signal reading. So if I wanted to track vocals, this is where I would select the input. So external in, that's what we're on. It's showing us that we're having a reading here. And now we can actually arm the track. So anytime we want to record on a track, we have to select the arm button. Then we can press record. I'm singing, I'm now recording into Ableton Live. This is my audio from my microphone. I'm singing, I'm now recording into Ableton Live. This is my audio from my microphone. So again, this is only going to work if you have a microphone, or you can use your computer stock internal mic. Obviously, the quality is not going to be that good. But for guitars, for instruments, for anything coming in, we're going to select external in. Then as long as we have reading here, we know that we're getting a signal. Arm the track, hit record, we're good to go. So a couple different options we have here. One is resampling. So if we want to resample from other tracks, we can do that. So if I want to come in here and like resample this to another track, we can do that. We can select resample. Remember, arm the track, hit record. I'm singing, I'm now recording into Ableton Live. This is my audio from my microphone. So that's kind of a useful tool as a resampling. Then these three settings down here. So in, auto, and off, this is basically the feedback of the track. So like we just recorded a vocal, and if we had this on in, what would happen is at the same time we're recording, it's going to output and that's going to create feedback. I'm singing. So like if I'm talking in, now I'm hearing myself talk and there's latency and there's going to be feedback. This is causing a bunch of problems. So we want this off. We typically want this off or on auto. Then we have where this track is going to. So as of now, it's going to the main, which is the master track. If we want to send it somewhere else, we can do that. So notice if we group this, which is basically grouping a bunch of tracks together, now we can see that the routing of this track is going to the group, and then the group is going to the main or the master track. So this is saying where this track is going. This is the fader of the track. So this is the volume, the master volume of the track. This is the on-off button for the track. I'm singing, I'm recording into. This is the solo of the track. So if we have a bunch of tracks and we only want to hear one, we can press S. I'm singing, I'm now. So if we have like two tracks and we want to solo one, I'm singing, I'm now recording into Ableton Live. And if we have multiple tracks and we want to solo multiple, we can hit Command, and now we can solo a couple tracks if we want. I'm singing, I'm now recording into Ableton Live. Or we can arm numerous tracks by holding Command. And then we have our sends. Basically, sends are sending a part of this signal onto another track. So say we want to send this vocal onto another track and then have them both meet up at the master. Why would we want to do that? Sometimes we want to add effects to something, but do it on another track without affecting the main track. So that's where sends come in. And by default, you should have a reverb and a delay send, and that's for a reason. That's because these are the two biggest sends that you'll probably use. And this is what's known as parallel processing, which again, we will cover later on in a different module. But basically, we can just drive some of the signal from this track. In addition to this signal going to the master, we can push some of this signal into a return track. I'm singing, I'm now recording into Ableton Live. I'm singing, I'm now recording into Ableton Live. I'm singing, I'm now. So this track is going to the master, and it's also routing a different part of the signal onto these two return tracks, which are reverb and delay. You can change these, you can modify these. It's anything you want to send a signal of a track into. So if I insert a new return track, and let's say we want to do like a saturation. I'm singing, I'm now recording into Ableton Live. This is my audio from my microphone. So now I'm sending this signal into our reverb send track. And the reason why this, like, you might be asking yourself, why wouldn't we just put saturation or reverb directly on the track? And that's something that we will get into depth later on. Basically, the difference is having one signal that has the processing directly on it versus having two signals, one that has the processing and one that doesn't have processing. We're maintaining both of them, and they're both meeting at the master. That's the short of it. So those are your sends, and as many sends as we create, we'll have more of these options here. Then we have the panning. So if we want to push something to the right side of the stereo field or to the left, we can do that here. I'm singing. And another pretty cool feature that not a lot of people know about is if we right-click this, we can select split stereo pan mode. And that allows us to affect the different sides of the stereo field separately. Again, we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. And then we have latency. So this is an option that's not going to be visible at first. You have to go into View on your settings here and select Track Options. And this is Track Delay, and this is a super powerful tool. We'll get into a little bit later. This basically allows you to delay a whole track. And this is super beneficial for introducing groove and things like that into your track. I'm singing, I'm now recording. I'm singing, I'm now recording. Now this whole track is being delayed. So those are essentially the functions of the head of the track. Another thing that's cool is going back to our automation. If we press A, now it's going to show us all of our different sorts of automation up here. So if we want to quickly access our automation, all those options are going to be down here, which is pretty cool. And then again, everything is going to our master or our main track. So everything is routed, unless you choose to do it otherwise, goes down here. This is your master track, and then everything goes out from here. So if you export a song, it's going to run through this track. So basically the routing is, this goes through the processing, so any processing you have on it, to the head of the track, and then to the head of the track to any groups it's in, and then that group goes to the master. So circling back to groups, basically what groups is, it's a really cool feature that allows you to group numerous tracks together if you want to process them together. So a common way this is used is putting different sounds with similar sounds that you're going to process similar. So like, let's say we have a hi-hat and we have our drum loop here. We can actually select these, so we can click the tracks, command click the tracks, or shift down, command G to group it, and now these are grouped together. So now we can add processing to these hi-hats and this drum loop at the same time. So now say we wanted to put like the same reverb on this drum loop and on this hi-hat, because these are both being routed to this group and they're both going through this group. Now these both have the same reverb on them. So group processing is a super powerful tool. We'll dive deeper into that. That is generally pretty a comprehensive overview of the Ableton interface. The last thing we're going to touch on is over here, it's called Session View. Session View or Mixer View. Ableton Live is made not only to use in arrangement, so this is basically arranging a track, but also in Session View. And this is good for live performers. This is good for triggering certain clips. It also shows us a better view of our mixer. So this over here, our mixer, has our faders on it, and this is going to correspond with these numbers over here. So this is essentially a better view of our faders. And so if we crank this up, we can be a little bit more finite with our volume adjustments. We can see our sends. We have a different view for our sends and our inputs and whatnot. But then we have these options up here. And basically what these are is this allows us to do some live stuff. It's kind of its own topic, but it allows us to trigger clips separately. So like, here's an example of that. So the way people will do these is they will either record stuff or they will put sounds on these tracks. And now we can trigger different rows of these at a time. So like, let me kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So if I press play, it's going to trigger this clip. It's going to trigger this audio clip. So this view is if you're live looping or you're creating, you're basically trying to print out your arrangement in real time. So over here we have like a guitar loop, and then we have this hat loop over here. Now let's say we want a section where we just have the hat loop, and let's say we have a section where we just have the guitar loop. We can trigger all these different rows separately and use this to create music. So we'll come over here and press play. It's going to trigger all these clips at once. So as you can see, what's happening here is we're triggering these different rows of loops, and these loops are automatically lining up with each other. And we're basically using this to jam out and print a live arrangement onto our timeline track. So if we do this, we hit this record icon here and then record, It's going to allow us to print everything basically directly to our timeline, which is kind of a cool feature. Again, I want to stress that none of the producers I know use this unless they're super big into live looping. It's not super beneficial, but it is Ableton Live, so in keeping true to that, they do have some pretty cool live features that will allow you to add clips here. So if you're into live looping, if you're into instruments, this might be something you want to check out. But again, it's not really what we're doing when we're arranging and writing EDM songs. And the last thing we're going to touch on is new in Ableton 12 is it gives us some more options for what we're able to see. Historically, you've only been able to see the lower menu. Now we can actually see numerous things at once. So we can see our audio effects and our clip editor at once, which is pretty cool. If we wanted to, we can come in and look at our mixer. So this gives us a lot of flexibility to see what we're working on. I kind of like to keep it pretty clean. So I like to keep it audio editor, browser, and timeline. But we have those options down here if we need to use them. So I know this was pretty long-winded explanation, but I feel like at this point, you guys have a good overview of how to use Ableton, and now we can finally get into the fun part and start making some music.
Mark.